The Galactic Council crossed the line. Humanity abandoned peace. The Galactic Council had always prided itself on being a beacon of peace. For centuries, it had maintained order in the galaxy, bringing together species from all corners of the universe to resolve conflicts, regulate trade, and foster cooperation. Humanity, newly inducted into the Council, had played an integral part in maintaining that peace. But no one had expected what happened on that fateful day. Admiral Sarah Velasquez stood in front of the colossal windows of the United Nations Assembly Hall, gazing out at the sprawling metropolis of New York City. The sun was setting, casting a fiery glow over the horizon, but Sarah hardly noticed. She had just returned from the most pivotal meeting of her life, one that would change the course of humanity's future. For months, the Galactic Council had been making decisions that affected Earth's sovereignty. First, it was a trade agreement that favored the wealthier, more established races, an agreement that left humanity struggling to maintain its resources. Then it was the imposition of new tariffs on Earth's exports. Now, the Council had voted to strip humanity of its right to self-defense. Sarah had been the one to deliver the message to Earth's leaders. And as she stepped into the meeting room, she felt the weight of their expectations bearing down on her. The room was silent as she took her place at the head of the table, the faces of the assembled leaders, politicians, generals, and scientists, locked in grim anticipation. Admiral President Lincoln Graves began, his voice steady but tinged with concern. What happened? The news, it's everywhere. The Galactic Council just voted to disarm Earth. How did this happen? Sarah took a deep breath, her mind racing as she searched for the right words. It wasn't just about disarmament, she began, her voice low but clear. The vote also includes the restructuring of our trade agreements, the reassignment of territories we've claimed for the better part of a century, and a host of other restrictions. It's a total reshuffling of our position in the galaxy, and frankly, it's a betrayal. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. One by one, the leaders voiced their disbelief. How could they do this? We've been loyal members of the Council for decades. Earth has always followed the Council's rules. We've respected their decisions even when we didn't agree with them, and now they're treating us like we're nothing. The words echoed in Sarah's mind. She had been part of those discussions, listening to the other races in the Council argue over the fate of humanity. She had even tried to convince them that Earth deserved to stand on equal footing with the more established species. But the more she fought, the more they seemed to close ranks against her. We can't let this stand, General Mark Thompson said, his voice cutting through the noise. We'll appeal this decision. There has to be a way to— No, Sarah interrupted, shaking her head. Appealing this decision won't change anything. They've made up their minds. This isn't just a policy shift, it's a message. The Council doesn't want humanity to be its equal. They want us to remain small, to remain subservient. Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The leaders fell silent once more, and Sarah could see the realization dawning on their faces. The Council was no longer a group of allies. They had become oppressors. I don't want to hear about diplomacy anymore, President Graves said, his tone steely. We've been patient for far too long. This is no longer about negotiations. This is about our survival. Admiral, what do you recommend we do? Sarah's heart pounded as all eyes turned to her. She had known this question would come, but she hadn't prepared an answer. How could she? Everything she had believed in, the years of serving in the military, the ideals of peaceful resolution, had been shattered in a single vote. I recommend we stop looking for their approval, she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. We've been trying to fit into a system that doesn't want us. Instead of fighting for a seat at their table, we should be building our own. The room was quiet, the weight of her words settling over the assembly. No one spoke for a long time, as if afraid to acknowledge the truth. But deep down, Sarah could feel that they knew she was right. The Council, in its arrogance, had crossed a line. And now it was up to humanity to decide whether they would continue to be a part of that broken system or break free and chart their own course. Finally, President Graves spoke, his voice firm but resigned. We've been negotiating for decades, and it's clear now that it's done. The time for diplomacy has passed. We'll take action. Sarah nodded, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and resolve. She knew what needed to be done, but she also knew that the consequences would be dire. Humanity was not ready for war, not yet. They had the technology, yes, but the galaxy was vast, and the Council had powerful allies. But as Sarah looked around the room at the faces of Earth's leaders, she saw something that made her feel a flicker of hope. It was a resolve, a determination to stand up for what was right. They had no choice now. If humanity was to survive, they would have to fight for their place in the galaxy. For the first time in years, Sarah felt the weight of her duty not as a burden, but as a calling. The galaxy had pushed humanity to the edge, but Earth would not back down. Not anymore. Later that evening, Sarah convened with her closest advisors. In the war room, the atmosphere was tense, the air thick with the anticipation of the decisions that would follow. There were no more illusions of diplomacy, no more talks of peaceful resolutions. The time had come to act. "We need to rally our forces," Sarah said, her voice now sharp and commanding. "We can't let the Council think we'll just lie down and accept this. We need to show them that humanity won't be silenced." General Thompson, who had been quiet up until now, spoke. "How do you suggest we begin? We don't have the resources of the other species, and we're not prepared for open war." "I know," Sarah replied, her gaze unwavering. "But we have something they don't, the will to fight. Earth's survival has always depended on our resilience. We'll start by mobilizing every military asset we have, every fleet, every weapon, every soldier, and we'll begin our campaign by striking where it hurts." The room fell silent as Sarah's words sank in. They all understood what she was asking. This was no longer about avoiding war, it was about winning it. "Are we ready for this?" General Thompson asked, his voice low but steady. Sarah turned to face him, her eyes burning with determination. "We have no other choice." The world felt different the next morning. The sun still rose over Earth's great cities, but there was a heaviness in the air that hadn't been there before. Sarah Velasquez stood on the balcony of her apartment in Washington, D.C., gazing out at the bustling streets below. 1,000 thoughts raced through her mind, but one kept repeating. Humanity had crossed a line. There was no going back. The weight of her decisions sat heavily on her shoulders. The emergency session of Earth's United Nations had ended late into the night, and she had spent hours discussing the future of humanity with its leaders. It wasn't a future she had imagined. Peace had always been the goal, but peace was no longer an option. As Sarah left her apartment to attend another high-level meeting, she could see it in the eyes of everyone she passed. People on the streets no longer wore expressions of optimism or hope. They were confused, afraid. The Galactic Council had delivered its blow, and Earth had no choice but to respond. Inside the war room at the United Nations, the tone was grim. World leaders, military commanders, and intelligence officials filled the room, their faces tense as they sat around the massive holographic table. Sarah took her place at the head, her uniform crisp and sharp, but her eyes showed signs of wear. The stress of the past 24 hours had taken its toll. President Graves, a tall man with a commanding presence, stood at the center of the room, his gaze sweeping across the gathered officials. "Admiral Velasquez," he began, his voice low, "you've had time to review the situation. What is your recommendation?" The room fell silent as Sarah stepped forward. She could feel the weight of their expectations on her. She was no longer just an officer. She was the symbol of Earth's resolve, the one person who had to make sure humanity survived in the coming storm. "We cannot, in good conscience, remain part of the Galactic Council," Sarah said, her voice unwavering. "The Council has shown that they no longer see us as equals. They've stripped us of our defenses, crippled our economy, and forced us into a corner. This is not a peace negotiation. It is a declaration of war." A murmur spread throughout the room, and Sarah could see the fear and disbelief in the eyes of the leaders. For years, humanity had lived in the shadow of the Galactic Council, hoping that through cooperation and diplomacy, they could find their place among the stars. Now that dream seemed to be crumbling. "Are we prepared to fight?" General Mark Thompson asked, his voice blunt. The man had always been direct, and right now, his words were exactly what Sarah needed to hear. She took a deep breath, turning to the table. "We've already started to mobilize. We may not have the advanced technology of the other species, but Earth's strength lies in its people. The Deathworlders, humans who have been trained for this moment, are ready. We will fight with everything we have." Sarah's words hung in the air, and for a moment the room felt like it was holding its breath. The Deathworlders were a hidden force, humans who had spent years in secret training, preparing for a conflict like this. They had been selected for their combat skills, their ability to survive in the harshest conditions, and their unwavering loyalty to Earth. They were humanity's last hope. "Are we really willing to go this far?" a voice asked from the back of the room. It was Senator Eliza Carter, a longtime advocate for peace, someone who had always stood by diplomatic solutions. "We can't just jump into a war. The consequences are already upon us," Sarah interjected. "The Council has declared their intentions. The only question now is whether we will stand and fight for our future or allow them to wipe us out." The room fell into silence once more. Sarah's words were harsh, but they were true. The time for peace had passed. Earth's leaders had been patient for too long, hoping for diplomacy to succeed. But now the gloves were off. The future of humanity was no longer in the hands of the Galactic Council. It was in their own. "We've already lost the support of many in the Council," Sarah continued. "We have to assume that war is coming. We must prepare ourselves accordingly." President Graves nodded slowly. "Then it's settled. We begin full mobilization. Admiral, I want you to take charge of Earth's forces, build a strategy, make sure we're ready." Sarah saluted. "Understood, sir." As the meeting adjourned, Sarah stepped into the hallway, her mind racing. The full weight of what she had just agreed to settled in. This was no longer a matter of military strategy, it was a matter of survival. Humanity was facing an enemy more powerful than any they had ever encountered. The Galactic Council had underestimated them, but that would soon change. As she entered her private office, Sarah activated a secure comm link. The screen flickered to life, revealing the face of an old friend. General Jackson Grant had been one of the leaders of the Deathworld Initiative, a program designed to create humanity's most elite warriors. "Sarah," Jackson said, his voice gravelly, "what's the situation?" "It's worse than we thought," Sarah replied, her voice heavy with the burden of leadership. "The Council has crossed the line. Earth is on the brink of war." Jackson's expression hardened. "We've been preparing for this moment. The Deathworlders are ready." Sarah nodded. "I need everything. I need you to call every unit into action. This is no longer about defense, it's about striking first." There was a pause, and then Jackson's face broke into a grim smile. "I'll get the ball rolling. We've trained for this. Earth will stand." Sarah ended the call and leaned back in her chair, her fingers running through her hair. There was no going back now. The Council had made their move, and humanity had no choice but to respond in kind. But as she looked out the window at the city below, she couldn't help but wonder if they were truly ready. War was coming, and it would change everything. Hours later, Sarah met with her closest advisors in the operations room, a high-tech facility buried beneath the UN headquarters. The room was filled with strategists, intelligence officers, and military leaders. The screens around the room flickered with maps of Earth's defenses, star systems, and potential enemy positions. The preparation was underway. "Admiral Velasquez," one of the analysts said, "we've identified several key targets in Council space. We've also got a report that suggests the Vronter, the insectoid species from the Cenari cluster, are preparing to back the Council's military. They've been our enemies in the past, and their fleet could be a serious threat." Sarah nodded, her mind already running through possible strategies. "We'll have to hit them first. If we can disrupt their supply lines and cripple their fleet, we'll have a fighting chance." She turned to the holographic map in front of her. "Our first priority is the Vronter. We'll send a strike team to their homeworld and disrupt their supply lines. Then we move on the Council's central systems. We can't afford to waste time." As the meeting progressed, Sarah felt a sense of purpose solidifying within her. She wasn't just leading a fight for survival, she was leading a rebellion. Humanity's moment had come. They would no longer be pawns in the Council's games. They would fight for their future, no matter the cost. But as she stood in the war room, a question lingered in her mind. Was this the right path? Could humanity truly fight and win against the might of the Galactic Council and its allies? Or would they be crushed, their efforts in vain? The only thing Sarah knew for certain was that peace was no longer an option. The time for diplomacy had passed. Humanity was standing at the precipice, ready to take the leap into a new, uncertain future. And there was no turning back. The days that followed Earth's declaration of readiness for war felt like a blur. Earth's cities, once symbols of prosperity and peace, now stood as preparations for the future of humanity. The war machine that had long been hidden beneath the surface of Earth's governments and military was in full motion. Military installations, once considered to be nothing more than watchful eyes on the galaxy's borders, now buzzed with activity. Spaceports once used for trade were transformed into launch zones for Earth's most powerful warships. But the true strength of Earth's military was hidden away in the secret training camps scattered across the planet, places few had known of, and fewer still understood. These were the breeding grounds for the Deathworlders. The Deathworlders were humanity's finest warriors, created in the most extreme conditions the galaxy had to offer. Their training was brutal, their minds sharp, and their resolve unbreakable. Unlike most other species, humanity had built its strength not on the peace of vast, beautiful worlds, but on the constant struggle to survive on Earth itself, a planet known for its chaotic weather, dangerous wildlife, and unpredictable nature. The training grounds for these soldiers mimicked that brutality, using Earth's harshest environments to prepare the warriors for anything they might face. General Jackson Grant stood at the center of one such facility, overlooking the massive training arena. The air was thick with tension, and the sounds of gunfire and explosions echoed across the horizon. In the distance, soldiers clad in combat gear darted through dense jungle underbrush, hunted by other soldiers disguised as predators. The sky above was filled with the thrum of hovering gunships, tracking the movements of those on the ground below. "How many units are ready?" Sarah's voice came from behind him, her tone calm but carrying the weight of the situation. She had arrived at the facility early that morning, her face showing the exhaustion of nights spent planning, but her eyes still burning with determination. Jackson turned, his expression hard, but there was a glimmer of pride in his eyes. "All of them, Admiral, every last unit. The Deathworlders are ready for anything." "Good," Sarah said, her gaze sweeping across the training ground. "We need them more than ever. The Council might have thought they could crush us with their votes, but they haven't seen what humans can do when pushed to the edge." Jackson nodded. "The training is unlike anything they've experienced before. Our warriors aren't just skilled in combat. They're built to survive. Every soldier here can survive in conditions most other species wouldn't last 5 minutes in. They know how to fight in jungles, deserts, underwater, on the most hostile planets the galaxy can throw at them. We've raised them to fight in the worst conditions." Sarah paused, looking out at the men and women under Jackson's command. "They're the only hope we have. The galaxy is a vast and dangerous place, but Earth's greatest strength has always been its ability to endure. And if we're going to survive this war, it's going to be because of them." A soft beep interrupted their conversation, and Jackson's communicator flickered to life. The holographic screen displayed an image of one of his commanders. "General, we've received new intelligence. The Vronter are mobilizing. They've begun assembling their fleet near the Scifi cluster. It looks like they're preparing to back the Council's military." Jackson's brow furrowed. "We can't afford to wait. If the Vronter join the Council, it'll be a disaster. We need to act now before they're fully prepared." Sarah's voice was steady. "How long until the Deathworlder teams are ready for deployment?" "We're ready to move out within the next 24 hours. Our first wave of fighters can be at the Scifi cluster within 2 days," Jackson replied. "Then we leave as soon as possible. We'll hit them hard and fast, disrupt their fleet, and cripple their ability to support the Council's forces. No one knows the Scifi cluster better than the Deathworlders," Sarah said, her eyes narrowing with purpose. "Let's make sure they know it." The following day, the Deathworlders were assembled, ready to depart. Sarah stood with Jackson in the control room of one of Earth's most advanced warships, the Valor. The ship, a massive battle cruiser, was equipped with advanced weaponry, shields, and propulsion systems that made it a formidable threat in any engagement. But it was the men and women aboard the Valor who would make the real difference. Sarah watched as the Deathworlders filed onto the ship, each one of them stoic, their eyes full of purpose. They wore the standard military uniforms of Earth, but beneath those uniforms were the marks of a people who had been forged by fire and adversity. These were soldiers who had been trained not just to fight, but to survive against the odds. Among them was a familiar face, Captain Elijah Kane, a former Marine who had risen to prominence during the early days of Earth's military expansion into the galaxy. Kane had once been one of the best soldiers humanity had to offer, and his presence here was a testament to the mission ahead. "Elijah," Sarah said as she approached him, her voice carrying a note of both respect and concern, "I need you to lead the first wave. The Vronter won't make this easy. We can't afford to lose any ground." Kane nodded, his face serious. "I've led men through hell, Admiral. We'll do what we have to do." Sarah clasped his shoulder. Make sure it's enough. As Kane departed, Sarah turned to Jackson. We've been preparing for this moment for a long time, but it still doesn't feel real. I don't know what the council thought they'd accomplish, but they've made a mistake. We won't back down. Jackson's gaze remained fixed on the soldiers below. We've trained for this, Admiral. The Deathworlders aren't just warriors. They're a symbol of everything humanity stands for. They'll fight and they'll win. We just need to make sure the rest of the galaxy understands that Earth isn't some side player in this war. We're here to stay. The Valor launched within hours, and as it made its way to the Scifi cluster, Sarah couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. For the first time in a long while, she believed that Earth's chances of survival had grown. The Deathworlders were humanity's greatest weapon, and with them, Earth had a fighting chance. The Valor entered the heart of the Scifi cluster just as the Vronter fleet was beginning to assemble. The Deathworlders, led by Captain Kane, were the first to engage, launching their assault with unparalleled precision. The Vronter, known for their fearsome insectoid warriors and their massive ships, were unprepared for the speed and ferocity of the attack. Human warships tore through the enemy lines, firing advanced plasma weapons that shattered the Vronter's shields. The Deathworlders, deployed on the surface of the nearby planets, infiltrated enemy bases and crippled supply lines. The Vronter had been caught off guard, and their response was sluggish, their lines faltering under the weight of humanity's assault. In the midst of the chaos, Sarah stood on the bridge of the Valor, watching as the battle unfolded on the screens before her. The Deathworlders were relentless, their tactics precise and brutal. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a message. Humanity wasn't going to back down, not now, not ever. The Vronter fleet, now in disarray, began retreating, their once strong presence in the Scifi cluster quickly fading. The Deathworlders had struck fear into their hearts, and for the first time, the Vronter realized that humanity wasn't just a species to be dominated. It was a force that could turn the tide of a war. As the battle reached its peak, Sarah knew that the outcome was still uncertain. The Council would retaliate, and other species would align against humanity. But for the first time, humanity had proven that it wasn't afraid to fight for its survival. The galaxy would never forget the day the Deathworlders awakened, and the message it sent across the stars. The Valor was still in hyperspace, racing toward its target, when Sarah Velasquez stood before the viewport, her hands clasped behind her back. Earth's finest warriors, the Deathworlders, had been unleashed on the Vronter forces. Sarah had heard the reports, but now she watched as the stars outside blurred into lines of light. Her mind was sharp, but her thoughts were heavy. The first strike was underway, and the future of humanity rested on its success. The Council had been wrong. Humanity wasn't some weak species waiting to be dominated. They had underestimated the strength of Earth and the unyielding spirit of its people. Now the galaxy was going to see what humanity was capable of when pushed to the edge. Sarah had given her orders. The Vronter, a race of insectoid creatures who had once been allies, were to be struck first. Their fleet, stationed near the Scifi cluster, was an important strategic asset for the Galactic Council. If humanity could cripple it, they would cripple the Council's ability to launch a counterattack. If they could break the Vronter, they would send a message to the galaxy. Humanity was not to be trifled with. General Jackson Grant stood beside her, his eyes focused on the holographic battlefield projected in front of them. He was calm, but his features were set in determination. "The Deathworlders are reporting heavy resistance," he said, his voice steady, though Sarah could sense the tension underneath. "The Vronter are tougher than we expected, but our forces are cutting through their defenses." Sarah nodded. "We'll need to do more than just push them back. We need to make sure they know we can outlast them. Earth doesn't back down, we'll break their resolve." The strategy was clear, a two-pronged attack. The Deathworlder assault teams would engage the Vronter on the surface of the planet, while Earth's fleet would disable their ships, keeping the enemy's forces divided. Sarah knew that if they could destroy or capture the Vronter fleet, the Council would be forced to reevaluate their strategy. But even as she formulated her thoughts, she felt the weight of responsibility press down on her. A report flashed on the holoscreen. "Admiral, the Vronter fleet is pulling back. They're trying to regroup." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "It's now or never. The Vronter cannot be allowed to recover. We're hitting them with everything we've got. General, I want all combat units to engage immediately. No hesitation." Jackson's expression hardened. "Understood." The Valor and its fleet of warships sped into the heart of the Scenari cluster. The stars seemed to stretch before them as they neared the enemy. Sarah could feel the tension in her chest. The battle had only just begun, but it felt like the weight of the galaxy was hanging in the balance. The battle broke out like an explosion. The Valor fired first, its weapons unleashing a barrage of plasma blasts that struck the Vronter's warships. The first wave of enemy vessels faltered, their shields flaring before crumbling. Humanity's fleet, while not as large or as advanced as the Council, was fast, determined, and ruthless. The Deathworlders in their assault pods had already hit the surface of the planet. They emerged from the pods like shadows in the night, moving swiftly through the dense alien jungle. The Vronter were expecting an invasion, but nothing could have prepared them for the sheer ferocity of the human warriors. They had been bred in the most hostile environments of Earth, trained to survive in jungles, deserts, and oceans that would break lesser beings. Now they were fighting on the surface of a Vronter world, and they were unstoppable. Sarah observed the battle on the main screen. The Deathworlders were tearing through the Vronter's ground defenses like a storm. They moved swiftly and silently, cutting through the Vronter's military strongholds with surgical precision. Sarah could see the fear in the Vronter soldiers' eyes as they realized their enemies were unlike any they had ever faced. It wasn't just the skill of the humans that was terrifying. It was their determination, the relentless will to survive. "Sir," a communications officer called out, "we've received a message from the Vronter command. They're requesting a ceasefire. They're offering to negotiate." Sarah's lips tightened into a thin line. "A ceasefire?" She looked to Jackson, who was already shaking his head. "They've lost the will to fight. They know they're beaten." "Good," Sarah said, her voice cold. "Tell them to hold their breath. This war has just begun." The first strike was over quickly. The Vronter fleet was in disarray. Several of their ships had been destroyed, and the rest were either retreating or scattered. On the ground, the Deathworlders had completed their mission. Key military bases had been destroyed, supply lines cut off, and communications shattered. The Vronter had no choice but to retreat, leaving their planet in ruins. For the first time in the conflict, Sarah felt a sense of triumph. Humanity had struck the first blow, and it had been a resounding success. But as the battle subsided, Sarah felt a growing unease in her gut. This was only the beginning. The Council wouldn't sit idly by while Earth waged war on its allies. The galaxy was vast, and the Council's reach extended across countless worlds. The Vronter were just one piece of the puzzle, and the true battle was yet to come. The Valor was now on its way back to Earth, the fleet battered but victorious. Sarah stood on the bridge, her gaze fixed on the stars ahead. The war had taken its first step, but she knew that the Council would retaliate. They wouldn't take this defeat lightly. "Admiral," Jackson's voice broke her thoughts. "What's next?" Sarah turned to face him. Her eyes were clear, the weight of the situation still present but manageable. "We prepare for the Council's response. We've proven our strength, but now we need to be ready for the true test. We strike when they least expect it." Jackson nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. "We'll be ready." The fleet continued its course, and Sarah turned her eyes back to the stars. The battle for Earth's future had begun in earnest. There was no turning back now. The galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. The war was just getting started, and Sarah knew that the worst was yet to come. The Council would regroup, they would gather their forces, and they would come for Earth. But humanity had shown that it would not be easily defeated. They had taken the first step toward securing their future in the galaxy, and they would not stop until the galaxy knew that humanity was a force to be reckoned with. The stars outside the Valor's viewport gleamed brightly, but Sarah Velasquez could feel a storm approaching. The first strike had shaken the Vronter, but it had also awakened the full wrath of the Galactic Council. The Council would not stand by while one of its most powerful allies was humiliated. The Vronter might have been beaten, but the war was far from over. As the Valor drifted through hyperspace toward Earth, Sarah stood in front of the strategic holographic display, her mind racing. The battle had already begun to shift. The Deathworlders' victory was a symbol of humanity's resilience, but it was also a warning to the galaxy. The Council's response would be brutal. Sarah had no doubt they would come for Earth with everything they had. General Jackson Grant entered the command center, his expression grim. "Admiral, we've intercepted several transmissions. The Council is preparing to retaliate." They've called upon their allies, the Zaren, the Maytari, and the Anokin. All of them are coming for us. Sarah's heart sank, but her resolve only hardened. The Council's allies were formidable. The Zaren were a race of brutal warriors, known for their savage tactics and unmatched strength. The Maytari, with their advanced psychic abilities, could overwhelm an army with sheer willpower. And the Anokin, a race of technologically advanced insectoids, had fleets that could tear through even the toughest defenses. "We're going to need more than just the Deathworlders to hold them off," Sarah muttered, looking at the holographic map of the galaxy. The coordinates of each of the Council's allies were marked in red, closing in on Earth. "We've built the defenses, Admiral," Jackson said, stepping closer. "But we've never faced a coalition like this before. If they launch a full-scale attack, we'll be outnumbered." Sarah's mind was racing. Earth had always relied on diplomacy and strategic defense. But now it was clear humanity's survival depended on something more. It depended on its ability to fight with heart and conviction. The same drive that had carried them through Earth's harshest trials was the only thing that could carry them through this war. "We'll fight them on our terms," Sarah said, her voice steady. "We've prepared for this. The Deathworlders will hold the front lines, but we need to focus on taking out their command centers. If we can neutralize their leadership, the rest of their forces will scatter." Jackson nodded. "We've already set up covert teams to infiltrate their systems." "But we're going to need an all-out strike, Admiral. We can't just defend. If we want to win, we'll have to hit them hard." Sarah turned to face him. "We'll hit them first, harder than they ever thought possible. We can't let them take Earth." The Valor arrived in Earth's orbit, and the atmosphere around the command center grew tense. Every moment felt like it was teetering on the edge of a precipice. The fleet of Earth's warships, though smaller than the Council-S, was ready to make its stand. The Deathworlders were in position, each unit prepared to defend the planet with everything they had. On the surface, human soldiers were already fortified in strategic positions across the planet. The defensive lines were set up around key cities, military bases, and industrial zones. Earth's forces had been mobilized, but they still had no idea how the Council would strike. Would they come with their full force, or would they attempt to strike from the shadows, using the element of surprise? "We've got incoming," the communications officer shouted, breaking the silence. "The Council's fleet is on the move. They're heading for Earth." "Battle stations," Sarah ordered, her voice a sharp command. "All ships deploy immediately. We engage them the moment they enter range." The fleet sprang to life, with the Valor leading the charge. Sarah could feel the adrenaline surge as she moved to her seat, her fingers flying across the control panel. The enemy ships appeared on the radar, vast, intimidating, and relentless. Hundreds of ships, some massive dreadnoughts, others fast and agile cruisers, were making their way toward Earth. Jackson stood at her side, his eyes scanning the battle display. "This is it. They're not giving us a chance." "They won't have one," Sarah replied, her expression determined. "We've trained for this. We fight to win." The first volley of fire came in as the enemy ships entered Earth's atmosphere. The battle was immediate and brutal. Explosions lit up the night sky, and the sound of laser fire and heavy artillery rang through the vastness of space. The Deathworlders were already engaging their forces on the ground, but the real fight was happening in the skies above Earth. Sarah gave the orders for Earth's fleet to break into 3 groups. One would engage the enemy directly, another would focus on countering their command ships, and the third would protect Earth's remaining forces. The strategy was risky, but it was the only way to keep the enemy from overwhelming them in the early stages of the battle. The Valor engaged the first wave of enemy ships, its advanced weapons systems cutting through the alien fleet like a hot knife through butter. The enemy, shocked by the ferocity of the human counterattack, began to regroup. But the Deathworlders, stationed on the surface, were already creating chaos in the enemy's ranks. They had struck first, and they would not be silenced. Human warships clashed with Council ships in a series of devastating explosions. The sky was filled with fire and light as both sides fought for dominance. Earth's fleet, though outnumbered, was determined. Their weapons were precise, and their tactics were effective. The enemy began to falter. Sarah's heart pounded as she watched the battle unfold. She knew that Earth was far from safe, but the tide was turning. Humanity was holding its ground. The enemy was not prepared for this kind of resistance. Hours later, as the battle continued to rage, Sarah watched the situation unfold on the bridge of the Valor. The Deathworlders had proven themselves invaluable, pushing back the enemy forces on the ground and in space. The Council's fleet was taking heavy losses. The initial wave of attacks had been repelled, and Earth's defensive lines were holding strong. But there was still one final challenge left: the command ship of the Zarin, a massive vessel capable of wiping out entire cities with a single blast. If they didn't neutralize it, all of humanity's efforts would be in vain. "We've got to take out that Zarin ship," Sarah said, her voice grim. "All ships, focus your fire on the Zarin flagship. We can't afford to let it get any closer to Earth." The fleet responded immediately. The Valor, along with several other warships, concentrated their fire on the Zarin ship. The battle raged on, each side giving everything they had. The Zarin flagship was enormous, its hull reinforced with advanced technology that made it nearly invulnerable to conventional weaponry. But Earth's warships had one advantage: they were faster and more nimble than the enemy had anticipated. In the heart of the battle, the Valor broke through the enemy lines, its weapons firing relentlessly at the Zarin flagship. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the flagship's shields began to crack. A massive explosion tore through its outer hull, and for a moment everything went quiet. The Zarin flagship, once a symbol of the Council's power, was no more. Sarah stood on the bridge, watching the battle unfold below her. The Council's forces were retreating. The enemy, once so confident in their victory, had been defeated. The war was over. Humanity had won. The cost had been high. Thousands of lives had been lost, and Earth had suffered extensive damage. But humanity had stood its ground. Earth had proven its strength, its resilience, and its will to survive. The Council had underestimated them. Now the galaxy would know humanity was not just a peaceful race, it was a force to be reckoned with. As the battle faded into the distance and Earth's forces began to regroup, Sarah allowed herself a moment of relief. She had led her people through their darkest hour. They had fought for their future, and they had won. But she knew that this victory was only the beginning. The galaxy had been shaken by humanity's actions. Earth's future was no longer defined by the Galactic Council. It was defined by the strength of its people.